All right. Welcome back to the Last Month in Security podcast. We're missing one of our co-hosts today. Golden is out, but I do have our Chief Security and Trust Officer, Ben Carr, here with us.
Anthony, good to be here with you again.
Always nice to see you. And we have a special guest today, Richard Greenberg, my old friend. We've known each other for quite a long time. Richard, tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, I want to thank you both for having me here today. This is a nice opportunity to talk about important stuff. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, glad
Great to have
you
you.
in the studio.
Thanks. So I'm a recovering CISO. Did that for many years. Got out while I still have some semblance of brain matter left. And I formed my own little consulting firm, Security Advisors, LLC. We help people do network pen testing, software security testing, risk assessments. Some of the more important things that I had to do when I was a CISO. So I know how to do this. In addition, I formed a company with 3 other cybersecurity professionals. We put on the Planet CyberSec CISO forums and cybersecurity conferences. I used to do that for ISSA and OWASP. I still do it for ISSA because I'm the LA chapter president. I'm very proud of that.
Very
for
good.
a while. But people have said to me, you guys put on the conferences with the best content. Why don't you just do it on your own? Because there's so many fly-by-night events going on. And it's just vendor show after vendor show. It's like, hey, we want good content. So I did that. So I do. That's my life. Those 3 things keep me very busy. Right?
Well, excellent. Thanks for driving down from LA to do the show with us.
Thanks for not having it early in the mornings.
Yeah, we try not to, or
I
too
always
close
hate
to
when people throw
lunchtime.
things early in the morning. It seems like everybody wants to do breakfast meetings, and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't like that.
That's why I have a Bachelor of Science and not arts, because all the language classes were like 8 o'clock in the morning. So I took physics
Hey,
instead.
my first semester of college, I had PE at 8 in the morning, so I don't want to
Yeah.
hear anything about it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, as usual, there's too many things to talk about, and so let's just jump in. We've talked a lot about the attacks on healthcare, ransomware attacking healthcare providers, those associated with healthcare providers. It's pretty much at an epidemic level now. The U.S., we talked in previous shows about the changed healthcare attack that affected as many as 1 in 3 people in the United States in one way or another, not being able to get their medical procedures, not being able to get their medications, healthcare providers not being able to get reimbursed from insurance companies. UK just had its own kind of changed healthcare level attack. It was pathology services provider Synnovis. So you're thinking this is just one small provider, but it impacted dozens and dozens of hospitals, similar kinds of things with procedures being able to being canceled, patients not being able to get the care that they need. And we've already talked about how ransomware attacks are now proven to be impacting patient care in a negative way. Now, the reason I brought this one up is because there's also the attack on CDK Global, which is a SaaS provider for automotive sellers. Now, of course, it's not the same level of emergency as when attacking healthcare providers. But
Come on, there's not much difference if you need a new Celica or if you have a heart attack. It's
Yeah,
pretty much the same
exactly.
thing there, right? Yeah.
But what I think we're seeing a little bit of a pattern here is that more choke points are getting targeted, right? CDK being one of those. So basically, it shut down the ability for car lots across the country to be able to sell cars and service customers.
Well, look, I think if you're looking at how attackers operate, right, it's pretty typical, from a defensive position. If you put yourself in the mind of the attacker and try to think of how that's going to go down, you're much more successful. And if I put myself in the mind of the attackers right now, I look at it and I say, well, where's the money? Like, where am I having the most success? Where am I causing the most impact? And I mean, it's really these back-end systems delivery companies, right, where there's such a wide systemic impact. It's a systemic cause of concern. It's not a point problem, right? So, if you've got, look at an actual healthcare thing, right? If you have a thing that's easily addressable and treatable versus a systemic issue that you're trying to treat within the body or a person, that's much harder. And that's where we're going to see, I think, more of these attacks. I mean, Richard, ISSA, you're talking to a lot of people out there. What are you seeing, right? Is this also an area of concern for you?
It's just logic, right? If you're a criminal, you want your biggest bang for the buck. It's cost you the same whether you're going to go after a collaborative organization of many businesses versus one business. So why not go for where you can get the biggest impact? right? And this is what we're seeing. You mentioned Chokepoint, right? It's basically, hey, I got access to 20 companies now versus just one, but same effort. So it's just
Well, I think the return is actually more, right? Like it's not just and let me clarify. It's not just the return, right? It's not that you're putting the same investment, you're getting a bigger return. It's that the pressure, right? The cause of concern is bigger because now instead of, you attack company A and it's just company A's assets,
Right.
like you're dealing with company A's concern, right? You're dealing with company B, and company B has company A through Z that are now calling them up and complaining, right? Because they can't get access to services. That's a much different leverage point that the attacker has against company B than they had against company A. So, same investment, as you said, right? Keeping that investment as low as possible, but trying to get to a point where we're actually seeing a larger leverage point getting the expected result out of it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies that will accept risk and just write it off and pay, right? But then there are other companies that are very concerned about their public image, their shareholders. And so if it's not just one, now you got all these, and the odds are you're going to meet some resistance to just, paying or not paying. And so you've got a wider range of pressure, as you pointed out. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that's maybe overlooked in this area, coming from a CISO side, and you're a former CISO as well, right? Recovering it as you mentioned. When I think about what I have to deal with as a CISO, if I'm the CISO for Coca-Cola, Citibank, General Motors, I know that I'm a big attack footprint, right?
Yeah.
And I'm really going to put the investment in there. I've got the money, the dollars behind it to invest. I mean, we all know financials, they put a lot of money into cyber protective work. But I think these back-end companies, Change Healthcare, CDK, I think a lot of times the executive staff, the board sees them as, hey, we're not as known, right? We're kind of behind the scenes. So our threat profile is lower. Like we don't have to make the investment. Cyber's not as big a deal for us. I think that's changing, right? I think people are seeing that there's actually more impact there. So there's a bit of a wake-up call that has to happen in the industry.
The large companies that agree to this connection with these companies, what kind of vetting did they do? What kind of third-party risk did they do, right, to allow this without finding out the level of security that you're talking about?
Well, and we've talked about this before on the show. The challenge is whenever you're dealing with a third-party risk, a CDK Global and a Change Healthcare both have a very unique problem in that, okay, I'm an auto dealer and I want to take advantage of this service. I've got one person, maybe two people that I can go to get this service from. I'm a healthcare provider and I need back-end processing work. I'm going to go to Change, right? It's not as if there is a large ecosystem, right? You get into this, the old mom and pop grocery stores don't exist, right? There's one grocery chain. It's all over the place. You're forced into dealing with it. And so as we get into that commoditization and the use of these singular providers, they become choke points.
Well, yeah. And so we've seen this obviously in like supply chain attacks where it's a very obvious strategy. You attack one, but you're actually attacking many. Right. Are we starting to see this in some of these other attacks, or are these attackers just getting lucky and they just happen to hit, a major pain point, a major choke point?
Where do you fall on that? I have my own thoughts, but where do you think?
Well, as I said earlier, I think that this is a concerted effort to go after where they can have the most impact and the most potential for payoff, right? But look at the two examples that you put forth, and you mentioned earlier. Cars, right? Who thinks of that as critical information, PII or anything? No, so maybe there isn't the same seriousness when it comes to security when you're talking about cars, right? So maybe the criminal minds are saying, let's go after organizations and industries that don't take security as seriously as, let's say, financial sector does, right? That's one thing. Now go to healthcare. We all know healthcare is major, right? Nobody wants, because the healthcare organizations, they don't just have your health information, they got your financials, because you got to be able to pay them. They have all this, they got everything about you. It's one of the most biggest treasure troves there is your healthcare organizations, right? So you would think that they would really embrace security, but they're way behind.
Large underinvestment
way
in healthcare,
behind.
yeah.
Always have been. right? And they're still playing catch up. So they're a more easy target than some of these other organizations would be. So you have two different vectors here, two different kinds of organizations, two different reasons, but both desirable attacks because of the lack of importance that security is probably in the boardrooms in these companies and these organizations.
Yeah, I think, if you look at cause and impact, sometimes they're different than what you actually assume and think that they are. In this case, it's my guess, and I could be completely wrong in this, but it's my guess that either, it's a very sophisticated actor that's doing a lot of intelligence gathering and work to figure out, I'm going to attack Change Healthcare. Or, and much more likely, I think in my mind, they lucked into it, right? Like they attacked Change Healthcare and, they got a foothold, didn't realize how big of a thing it was. It kind of blew up. We saw this with Colonial, right? I don't really think they intended to cause the level of impact with Colonial Pipeline that they did. And when they did, it was probably more concerning for them. Oh shit, we've tripped over the line here. We probably raised a little bit more concern that we should have. However, now I think what we're probably going to see is, and it's probably the same thing with CDK. I doubt that they were specifically necessarily targeted, but now we've seen kind of this evidence build up, right? This
They're taking
chain
notes,
of events. And
right?
they're going to say, wait a minute, we've missed out on this whole thing. Like, why are we attacking the hard guys? Let's attack the guys that are easy to attack, that don't have a lot of defensive infrastructure, that have been underinvested for a long time. And that pivot's playing off, right? And so if you were, again, put your mind inside the criminal mind, low cost, easy to do, quick return on investment.
And they know third-party exposure is something that we haven't addressed.
And I think you mentioned it too. You mentioned critical infrastructure in a way, right? Like if you're going to go after, again, Colonial and cause that level of impact and raise the ire of the U.S. government, that's probably not smart, right? Because something's going to happen. CDK Global, yes, it's concerning that you can't get your Prius, your Celica, your Corvette.
But it still strikes me as interesting that that Colonial caused much more of a panic within our government and a response and stuff than these attacks on like Change Healthcare and stuff. It was much bigger news. Even though ultimately it just meant you couldn't fill up your tank, right?
Well, but that's a if you think about transportation, that's much more.
That's different than increasing
healthcare. That's affecting
Medicare,
food. That's
patient deaths.
It's everything, right?
By 30%.
Well, I think our government's well aware, as many of us are, that our infrastructure security has been crap for a long time, and it's a major concern. And we kind of just gloss over it, and we hope that there's honor among the criminals saying
this is no honor among thieves.
but also besides the honor, they don't want and you mentioned the ire of the U.S. government, right?
The pivot.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, well, let's not wipe out electricity for America because that might be a bad thing in the long run. Because that's like
they're cooking their own golden goose here, right?
I think Change Healthcare probably was bigger than they thought it was going to be. I think the U.S. government is probably highly concerned about that, right? Again,
rightfully so.
It's just where's the pivot and where's the next target, and I think part of that is you asked, is it intended? I think part of it's luck, right? But there probably is going to be a greater focus on this, the third-party risk, the supply chain risk.
Luck informs strategy, right?
The downstream impacts. I think people are, especially on the attack side, are starting to realize the further upstream in the line you are, the more impact you're causing, and the wider problem, the greater
and
leverage
potentially
you have.
the easier the target.
Yes.
So let me broaden this conversation for a minute and ask you guys a question, because I'm grappling with this and I've had this discussion over scotch with some friends in the field. So, no one's officially said that most of these ransomware attacks are Russia state-sponsored or supported or encouraged.
Well, I've been saying that a lot.
I believe
attribution's hard.
Yes, but this is my personal belief from what we've seen and what we've read so far. And now we've seen, with Russia and Ukraine and the interactions with NATO and the threats. I'm wondering if Putin is emboldening these ransomware companies a little more and said, go ahead, cross that line that we were afraid to cross. Let's give it to America a little bit more. I mean,
healthcare is a perfect way
Yeah.
to do that, right? As opposed to targeting water treatment plants or a nuclear power plant or something that's going to really force the U.S. government's hand.
Because none
as
of
far
this
as
happens in a
response.
vacuum.
Well, I don't think it's just Russia though, right? Like it's probably Russia, it's China, it's North Korea, it's Iran, it's any.
China's different. They just want info.
Well, but we just had Volt Typhoon come out, right? So,
Okay.
and then the Chinese immediately came out and said, no, that was a ransomware company. And I was like, see,
there-
that proves my whole
Look,
point.
we
They're
realize
using
that
this
there's
for
air
cover.
cover.
Right.
They're
Plausible
giving air cover.
deniability, right?
But I think especially as we go, no matter what side of the political spectrum you go on, it's a very sensitive time right now going in the elections for us, right? And I think the more and more focus and the air cover, if you can make things confusing for your enemies, it's a much more effective tactic.
Chaos.
Yeah, that's
Well, and that's the report that the Chinese are in our critical infrastructure, and we'd likely see that potentially used as part of a strategy while they're engaging in kinetic warfare. Let's say taking over Taiwan.
I think there's two sides to this, right? So there's probably a bright line, right, which is known by both U.S. and foreign actors, that it's probably you cross this, it enters into kinetic action, right?
Right.
I think up into that line and very close to that line, there's going to be more and more pressure put on that. But I think the scarier thing is the potential for latent access to be there across the other side of that line, that if anything went hot, right? If tensions in Ukraine went hotter and we started to actually have more kinetic action that directly involved the U.S., like, does it go that way? Do we see critical infrastructure where it actually gets compromised? That's really concerning. I mean, it should concern a lot of people. I really don't, I haven't talked to anybody that says, yeah, we're putting enough focus and energy on it, right? I mean, your thoughts?
Absolutely.
I mean, you were CISO for Department of Public Health for LA County, right? Like, that's an area of concern, right?
Well, before that I was CISO for LA Department of Health. That's where the hospitals are.
Yeah.
That's more of a concern, even because that's critical.
It's life and death.
I think that it's clear that there has been between 50 and 100 deaths that can be attributable to ransomware attacks over the last 4 or 5 years. That's pretty much, and that might be underestimating.
Yeah, we've talked about those stats in previous shows, so you're right on.
And so we're talking about murder, basically.
Yep.
And so that's pretty serious.
That's why I don't understand.
We've talked about this before on the show. Like, where is the line between? Where do you draw the line between it's disruptive and it's criminal? In the sense, I mean, that again, murder's criminal, right? But like, I think that crosses a line into something different, where you're almost it enters into a warfare phase, right?
Yep.
How do you draw the line on that? Where does that line go? I mean, there must be talked about, right, at the highest levels in the U.S. government. Where is that line?
That's
How
why
many people
I
have
think
to
it's the
die?
last show that it seemed like 10 years ago, all these companies' hair were on fire because about APTs who would probably never attack them because they weren't part of the defense industrial base. They weren't, developing some cutting edge technology, yet they were willing to spend a lot of money to make sure that, APT number whatever didn't get into their systems. Now, the very real chance that they're going to be attacked by a ransomware operator because they're not very selective, or they will take the lowest hanging fruit, and the level of concern seems to be meh.
So, and we're going very, very far down the lane, right? And I don't want to overemphasize this, but September 11th, right? Thousands of people died, right? So, if we had an event where 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people died.
Yeah, you're looking for a number. I don't know.
No, but I mean, I'm not looking for a number. I'm saying, like, it is somewhere, right? Like, we obviously.
What is that?
We had
threshold?
kinetic action as a result of that event, right?
Yeah.
Does that happen here? Like, or because it's cyber, is it so hard to put our finger on it and say, well, we can directly trace this to a cyber
Well, when it was
event,
just espionage,
so cyber event crosses
It's the
into warfare.
attribution that you mentioned earlier. That's the key. The kinetic action that it was 9/11, we knew what that was and who did it.
Yeah, they raised their hand.
Now there's this deniability of not.
But let's say
it's not-
somebody raises their hand and said they did that, and let's say just 1,000 people died. let's say they
force
bring
the US
down
government's
a
hand.
jumbo jet, right? They get access to something, they cause a ransomware issue, and 3 or 4 jets fall out of the sky as a result of that.
But
right?
okay, so
and they raise their hands and they say, "We did it."
all right, short of an equal or greater cyber attack on the perpetrators, who are you going to attack kinetically? Who? They are on the
Because they
internet
have the plausible
somewhere.
deniability and say, oh, we're just.
Well, that's where you always like to go is the terrorism thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I'm going is like if somebody raises their hand that this is a terrorist event,
Right.
is that something that something happens as a result of?
Yeah, but they're not sitting in a cave that we can bomb.
And these groups that we
could
know are
potentially be,
attacking.
though, right? Like that's my thought is they could potentially be. Like it's
They're
a
not.
little bit harder.
They're
with,
not attacking Russian targets. So I mean, it's like fairly obvious, right?
So that's where we draw the line. Is it's you're not attacking. We're not going to attack Russia or China.
Well, if we do that, we're going down a road that there possibly is no return. That's the problem.
Yes, but what I'm positing is that it's actually much more plausible to think of that than somebody rolling tanks, right? Like if you wanted to go after Taiwan, it's much more plausible to think of a large cyber incident, right?
Yes.
That predates that event happening, an invasion of Taiwan, right?
Well, we saw our dress rehearsal at Georgia, right? They started with the cyber and then they went in with military.
Our rules of engagement typically say that any response is going to be proportional, right? So it would probably be another cyber attack. But when you start talking about there was actually deaths, if there was 1,000 deaths, then how do you have a proportional cyber attack?
You're proportional attacking that as well.
And we don't want to go kill civilians.
Right?
We don't.
That's the challenge,
Yeah, we
right?
don't do that. So
you're dealing with it becomes somewhat of an ethics problem from a larger case, right? And we went down an ethics discussion before we got on the show. But that's always hard, right? Taking the high road puts you in a really weird spot.
Well, while we're talking about what kind of action should we take, let's look at the actions that we do take right now, which are law enforcement actions, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about this. 3-year investigation. We've indicted 2 guys in Russia who are never going to get extradited and face any charges. So let's look at Lockbit. Okay, back in February, Operation Kronos, the FBI, Justice Department. Basically took over and dismantled a whole bunch of Lockbit's infrastructure. If you're not familiar with Lockbit, they were probably the number one ransomware as a service provider and payload that was being delivered for the last, year and a half, 2 years. They were hands down the champ. They were doing 5-10 times as many attacks as any other RAS provider. At first, it looked like it was fairly successful in taking over their infrastructure, but then we see the attacks keep rolling in. I've seen at least 150 plus attacks recorded in May that were attributed to Lockbit or their affiliates using their platform, and then they claim they hit the Federal Reserve. Okay. Of course, there was a lot of doubt about that, and it turned out they didn't. When they did finally release some evidence, they hit a regional bank. But nonetheless, there's evidence that they're still active. There's evidence that they're trying to kind of rehabilitate their reputation amongst the affiliate attackers and show that they're still.
This is a lined up to attribution, though, right? Attribution is hard. Efficacy of action is hard.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think it's always going to be hard to figure out. Like, are you actually getting the results out of these actions?
I mean, look, you said it. It's an affiliate network, so it's like when you saw a lot of things attributed to Anonymous, right? It's like, who are they? It's someone calling themselves that. I mean, so this Lockbit, it's spread out all over the place. It's a bunch of different organizations, and then you killed one. It's not the head necessarily, but the rest of the body's still there.
And the payload code is out there, right? So
the analogy is a terrorism network, right? Like it's really, really hard to get at that because they don't fight with rules. They don't fight with uniforms. Like, if you wiped out all of ISIS today and somebody starts up tomorrow with the ideology and calls themselves ISIS, they're still ISIS, right?
Exactly.
That's this, right? So if you have this really hard to pin down ethereal entity that's out there, saying you're going after Lockbit isn't saying you're going after Bob. You're almost going after an ideology again. That makes it really, really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, look, in the black market, you've got tools They sell these tools. They give you maintenance contracts. You pay for
Support services.
Exactly. It's the same as the real world, but it's a mirror image on the criminal world. And so, they buy the same tools that they were using, and they look the same. And how do you differentiate who they really are?
Well, and does the differentiation really matter at the end of the day?
Exactly.
and the brag about hitting the Fed. I mean, so here's the platform providers trying to keep affiliates using their platform so they get a cut of the money, right? When we saw Lockbit get disrupted, Play, another major RAS provider, by default kind of became the leader, at least in my last quarter's report. I do that quarterly report, the ransomware malicious quartile.
I like seeing that.
It gives you kind of a handy little reference to kind of see what's happening. But then there's a few other groups that have all of a sudden, just really came on strong. Inc. Ransom is doing a lot of attacks. Hunters International is doing a lot more attacks. Akira, of course, has been a major threat for a long time, and they're seem to be accelerating. So that could be evidence that some of these affiliates that were working with Lockbit have now moved over to be working with some of these other attackers. So we took out Lockbit SUP, and you can't whack 1,000 moles, right? And when you just whack one, is there something else we should be doing? What else can we be doing?
Well, there was some people that put forth that, and this is very controversial, that they should outlaw paying ransoms.
Thank you. That's where I was going to go. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
However, don't get too
that softball for you.
Don't get too excited because Jen Easterly very recently was addressing
Last week?
Yes.
So she wasn't going to do. They weren't going to do it.
So not likely.
And that was kind of like a clear sign. And the reality is, and the logic that I think she even expressed, is that you got SMBs that would go out of existence unless they paid because they don't have a good.
Yeah, but isn't there a different model, right? So I'm not the smartest guy in the room, right? Sometimes I'm the dumbest guy in the room. I'm happy to admit that. But it's really easy to think about a model, and we've talked about this before again, where you put in place some type of, it's almost like an insurance system, right? Where you say, okay, we're gonna contribute, or there's gonna be some backing by the U.S. government, right, to allow for support of organizations. So a SMB has an event, right? Mm-hmm. We identify that it's a ransomware event, and we're gonna say we're not gonna let you pay that ransom. We're gonna prevent it. You're federally obligated. You can't do it. No transfer of funds. Can't use a third party. We make it airtight. If we do that, but the federal government comes in and says, okay, and we're going to help you recover, right? If this happens, mm-hmm. I see the problem going away fairly quickly, right? If you remove the incentive, if you remove the motivation, which I think we would all agree, any expert would agree, this is monetary, right? It's not. Warfare is a whole different issue, right? That still exists as a problem theoretically in the long term, but in the short term, the thing we're seeing right now is a monetary motivation. If we take that away, I don't see the downside to that.
I mean, you still have the problem of the data exfiltration, but that would
the exposure, right?
That would just force them back into what they were doing before, which is
walk the road, right?
Yeah.
So I'm company A. Somebody tries to extort me from ransomware, right? So the ransomware component, I say you can't make the payment. Okay, well now somebody comes and says, well, I've got data exfiltration. I'm going to extort you for it. No, I'm going to prevent the payment. You can't be compensated.
So basically
why would any actor go through the effort? The only reason why is if they want to cause damage, right? If they're just going to do it anyway, right? And then the ransomware is not going to, the payment isn't going to help you in the first place.
Yeah.
Or if it's warfare, right?
No, but you're looking at it from just one perspective.
Sure.
I'm a company.
Yeah.
Company A, right? And this happens to me. I get attacked, and ransomware is successful. Now, in the world that you're talking about, the government says, "Oh, we'll step in. We'll help you recover your data," right? But in the meantime, the company, let's say they're very sensitive to how they appear in the public. Not every company is. Some say, if it gets out, TJ Maxx is the poster child for this. Did their stocks go down? Did their business go down? Hardly at all. They just kept going, right? However, there are some companies that really care about their image. And if their image goes down the toilet because their data has been exposed, then they might go out of business even with
Ashley
Uncle
Madison.
Yeah, even with Uncle Sam's help.
Okay, all right. So let's walk that line. Right now, that doesn't matter anyway because the SEC has said you've got to report. So if you have an incident, like, yeah, you could say, okay, well, I'm private. And because I'm private,
Admitting that you had an incident versus the data out there for everyone to see, kind of different things.
you've got to report that the data is out there. You've got to categorize what it is, right? You've got to notify all the affected parties. What I'm saying is like the data's okay. Change Healthcare. The data's out there anyway. Like they paid $22 million and they didn't get the data back.
Yeah,
There's no guarantee. that
Another
you pay the
threat
ransom.
actor, ransom, appears to have that data and is trying to extort them again. So
Look, your idea has good qualities in it. I'm just saying it's not the end all, and there's going to be companies that it's just not going to help. Maybe it will help a lot of companies. So I think it has merit. It has merit.
I'll throw
there's
one
probably
more.
Look, it's a complex issue. There's a lot of things, but what I'm saying is, like, as a group, right? Like, we should all get together and figure out how to stop the problem. Because right now, what we're doing is we're just pushing the ball down the lane.
Can I throw one more
somebody else's
curveball
problem.
at you?
Yeah, go ahead.
On this? Okay. Okay. U.S. bans ransom payments. Now my payload is a wiper. It's not a locker. So
What's the difference,
you don't pay. Well, a locker. I mean,
No, I know technically
Yeah.
what the difference is.
Yeah.
Go ahead and explain it for anybody who's not.
no. A locker just locks up your data, and you get a key, and you unlock it. A wiper would destroy all
Sure.
of the data, which I think, and they're targeting
what I'm
backups, and so there's potentially.
But again, I go back to like, so whenever we look in cyber or any other industry, we look at like root cause for why a problem is happening, right? And what we're dealing with now is a symptom. It's not the cause. The cause is the monetary incentive.
Money's behind most things, isn't it?
Yeah, but in your point, like if I ban the payment, whether it's encryption, whether it's exfiltration, whether it's wiping, if I ban the payment, right, of essentially some type of extortion for criminal behavior, then I'm taking away the monetization.
How do you?
So yes, you're going to have I'm not denying the fact that you'll have incidences where someone's data gets encrypted, someone's data gets wiped.
There are companies.
But that will stop at a very quick pace when the people realize that there's no return on the investment they're making. It's a business issue.
There are companies whose sole job is to help companies get their data decrypt. But in reality, what they're doing, they're contacting the ransomware companies and paying them the ransom on the sly, and then telling the other and charging the other company
Kim
more.
Zetter wanted to just create a black market for this. And
Exactly.
offshore it.
Yeah,
And
but
that-
again, I
that's-
mean, this is systemically can be like we can design the system to work with all these gotchas and holes, right? Like, but what my argument is, we're not having that discussion right now, right? We're saying dealing with the cause is too hard, so we're going to let it go on, right? Like, imagine if you had cancer and you had a cure for it, and instead of curing the cancer, we just said we're going to deal with all the symptoms of the cancer. Well, you got a pain in your arm, let's cut your arm off. Oh, your leg doesn't work as well, let's get you crutches. Like, all we're doing is fixing these problems, and we're ending up with this long-term problem that we're dealing with the very long.
So if the
tail of
solution
it.
was so beautiful, why isn't it going forth now? There's got to be other issues behind this, right?
I think part of it's the investment side. Like, this would take a nation state level response from us to say we're going to deal with this. And I think, look, right now it's, again, I hate to dive into the politics of this, but like I think right now we're caught up in other things from a political side, right? I think that there's low incentive for anybody to push like significant change. And again, no matter which side of the coin you fall
doesn't it
on,
look
in
like
Capitol Hill, like it's hard to get anything done.
Aren't we going to see an example of this? Isn't the UK kind of really like moving towards banning ransomware payments? And we might be able to see
I
it
think they might
in
be.
action.
I would love to see somebody do that. Like that would be wonderful, right? Like if the UK did it and we saw like a drop off, like it fall off a cliff in UK having issues. Now, the globalization will still have an impact of a UK company has a U.S. presence or vice versa.
Third-party risks.
Like you'll still see some
blast
of that.
radius.
But if you could look at it and say that there's a significant drop off in the activity for the UK, if the UK banned it, I think that would be a way to show a direction in a way forward. But it will take. This isn't trivial, right? Like the amount of a national response on this and to take ownership. That's the thing that's always challenged me is we see a lot of this activity. And Jenny Easterly and CISSA are doing a great job. I don't have a problem with them. I love them, right? But ultimately, I don't think we're taking as much ownership of this, where you always get to this, is it terrorism or not? Like, classify it, name it, call it out, and say, we're going to treat this like the thing it is, and the U.S. is not going to tolerate this anymore. Coming from, if it's coming from the U.S., it's bad, but we can go after you federally with federal powers.
Yeah, we have not seen a statement like that at all. We're going
to call it.
We issued some more guidelines for healthcare providers.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we're really holding the victims responsible, right? And we're saying, well, it's your problem. You didn't have the right security controls in place.
Yeah, you didn't follow this framework from NIST.
That's a symptom. Like, stop infecting me, right? Stop giving me the problem in the first place. I don't know. That's my theory. It's a hard problem, but I think
I'll throw one more curveball out there.
Yeah,
let's say it works in practice as you've described, and they say, well, we're not going to get paid, so we're going to attack these entities. So we're basically back to stealing information for selling it on the black market, the same kind of thing for identity theft, stuff like that. But what about now? We've seen a little bit more of these threat actors going after individuals.
Just before you go, I want to say that we've been dealing with identity theft for years.
Oh yeah.
The U.S. really hasn't done anything. It's almost as if we don't care, right? We just let it happen.
I think we required companies to offer you 2 years of credit.
Yeah, right. So
how many companies do you have that with already?
Yeah.
Look, I'm not a fan of big government programs and ideas and the government is here and we're here to help. Those are scary words for me. But yet, I think this is a massive problem. So go ahead.
So I'm going to say, let's say
these things are things we need to address.
So let's say, okay, dang it, we can't get any money for this PHI that we stole.
Yeah.
So we're going to go after these individual patients, ask them for $500 each.
Prohibited.
Well, you're actually seeing some of that now. There are calls being made to individuals.
Oh yeah, and party extortion, right?
Yeah.
You extort the company that the data went to, you extort
Business
the person who actually
customers.
It's already happening.
It's down the chain, but my answer to that is this is a holistic solution we look at.
Yeah.
It's not of we stop it at level 1 and it just moves to level 2. It's there would be no payments possible for fraudulent stuff, right? We just don't allow it. There's no way to do it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we're just going to push the pain to a different, point on the chain. But
okay, your data gets compromised, right? And an actor comes and says, Anthony, I have your health records. I'm going to expose them if you don't pay me. I'd love to, but I can't pay you.
Yeah.
There's no physical, I'm just not allowed to. Payments, so there's a model for this, right? So Visa and MasterCard, there are things that they don't allow to happen, right? So cannabis is one of them, right? Because it's federally prohibited, it's that's still a crime federally. Visa and MasterCard don't want to step into that arena and allow for that payment because they don't want the federal government to come and say, oh, you're enabling this thing, which is federally illegal. So you can't, if you sell cannabis, you can't actually have a Visa or MasterCard payment system, right? You can't step in with PayPal, right? That's why it's all cash. That's why these businesses deal in all cash. Well, in the ransomware side of the house, they're not going to take cash, right? They take crypto. So stop this, right? Disallow it, right? So as soon as these entities get identified, as their accounts get identified, which we know about them, again, they're going to start to create more accounts and new stuff. But if we just put the kibosh on that and say there's no transfer to these accounts are prohibited.
But you're talking about a huge investment of American dollars.
Yes.
Well, and I'm so cynical. I'm going to say, boy, now we'll see the government regulators jump into action to go after victims.
No.
Right?
Don't go after what I'm saying. Don't go after the victims. Go prevent the payment processing. Right?
Yeah.
Prevent the transfer of funds, and that's the way to do it. How are you going to get your money, right? You're Anthony Freed. Your data's been compromised.
I got to go open a Bitcoin wallet.
But where are you going to transfer that Bitcoin wallet out of Bank of America? You've got to document why that.
Yeah, same way they do with terrorism. Watching where funds go.
And everything else, right? They're good at following the money on some things and really bad at following the money on the other things. I think this is an area where if we looked at economically and said this is the total investment that the U.S. is spending in a national problem on ransomware, it's costing us X dollars. I would guess, I could be completely wrong, but I would guess the cost of actually implementing a solution to fix it would be less than that cost right
But
now.
as I mentioned earlier,
And I'd make that investment.
But as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see an increase in the black market of these companies that in the back are negotiating with these perpetrators.
Potentially.
So, again, well, I mean, like, we could beat this dead horse. I don't know if there's where else you want to go with it, but like, okay, in that you can't have a U.S. company can't start up and do that. Like, we would prohibit that, right?
Why a U.S. company?
Okay, but you can't. A U.S. company would still have to transfer the funds to that company. Like, you would have to identify.
The guys is we've hired this company to help decrypt our data for us to get our data back. That's what it's looking like officially. But in reality, they're back channeling.
Yeah, but my guess would be just a theory. If we're walking through the use case of it. Change Healthcare said the actor said they wanted $22 million. Mm-hmm. So in your analogy,
that's pretty high for ransomware, isn't it?
Not for what Change had. Yeah, about
middle
of
the
road.
biggest ones. Yeah.
So let's just say $20 million. Company says $20 million. Well, your shell company in this instance, right, that's been set up to deal with this to get the money back, is probably going to want $25 million to get it back. Right. I would say that's going to raise some questions.
No, they're negotiating down with the original attackers. Otherwise, they're not going to get anything. They'll negotiate.
Yeah, but they're not going to negotiate to $100.
No, of course
right?
not. Yeah.
And these companies are going to be readily identified, right? Like, and again, it would probably require some international cooperation on this, right? Yeah, you're not going to get...
There you go. And that's it.
But we've talked about the UK is thinking about doing this, right?
Right.
So I would say that you could probably go to all the G7 and you could say, hey, we're going to do this. Now, if you set up a company in Afghanistan to do it, it's probably going to raise some questions on the monetary transfers that are going on to that company, right? Like, you'd have to identify, like, we do this with terrorism and money transfers.
And again, I'm so cynical that while we're currently just offering companies guidelines and frameworks with which to protect themselves from ransomware, that if this kind of ransomware ban goes through, then we're going to see some serious muscle behind enforcing, not paying, where the U.S. government does very little to actually help these companies protect themselves from the attack in the first place. But that's
an implementation
cynical
problem, right? That's my okay. So let's. Are there questions to be answered? Yes. Are we having the conversation? No.
Yeah.
Let's sit down and have a conversation. Get industry experts together and actually sit down and create a task force to figure out a solution to this that deals with the real problem.
You know what I'd love to see?
Yeah.
The whole concept that Easterly is backing secure by design. That would be really helpful. That's not going to solve the whole problem.
She did mention that in her.
Yeah, because companies are still going to be stupid about patching, which is like a no-brainer, right? And other things that they could do. I mean, you mentioned earlier about sophisticated attacks.
They're not. It doesn't take sophisticated.
The attacks are now finally starting to get sophisticated, but for the past 10 years they weren't. When all the company reps would say, "Oh, this was a sophisticated attack," when in reality they just didn't patch or do something basic.
I've actually got something on this, and I don't want to go too long on this one because there's one other one that we were talking about earlier that I'd like to spend some more time on. But I've always been a fan of the don't blame the victim, right? Don't pile on and stuff. But last year...
Sometimes the victim's stupid, though.
So CISSA has set up a vulnerability database, basically. And last year they alerted nearly 2,000...
backstop kind of MITRE and NIST on this. Right?
Last year they alerted nearly 2,000 organizations about vulnerabilities that could be exploited in ransomware attacks that these companies were vulnerable to. Yet only about half took action on this.
Sure.
So... there is a point where, not blaming the victim unless they're just not doing anything to help themselves, right?
Yeah. So again, I would go to look at the cause, follow the cause. And I'd be really interested, where you see this, because you're talking to a lot of different companies, right?
First of all, don't blame the CISO.
Yeah.
No, that's where I was going to go. Exactly. Well, I don't think it's a CISO problem. I actually think the CISOs want to solve this, right? Now, look. There are multi-levels of CISOs, right? There are first-time CISOs. There are CISOs who never should have been CISOs. There are really, really good CISOs out there, right? And so that's a grayscale. So given that, in my experience, it's not been the CISOs that are the fault. It's the executive staff and the board not treating this seriously and not wanting to put the right effort behind it. Now, one can make the argument that they've looked at the business and they said, we're not going to invest. But then I think if you do that, then you own the risk, right? Like,
Well, yeah, that's it. They make the risk determination, and many companies will say, we'll accept that risk. And if there is a problem, we'll just deal with that and the repercussions. But it's better
that's
than paying up front.
yeah, I agree with you on that. But and that risk decision is being made, and that's a valid thing, right? Where I fall back on a causality of that is, I don't think the board and the exec staff is doing what they're really supposed to be doing, though, is actually highlighting the transparentness of that to investors, right?
Yes.
They're not saying, like, these are the risk decisions we're making. People have treated it too long of this is a technical problem. It's very hard to understand. And so we're not going to, like, when we don't understand it, so we're just going to say we think it's okay.
See, we're going back to ethics once again.
Yeah.
Because when a corporation makes this determination, are they taking ethics into account? Are they thinking about the people whose information is being compromised, or is it just treating it as a number?
So part of it's ethics, but wouldn't you also agree that part of it is actual education and understanding? And so this is a big bone of contention for me. When you look at the Fortune 500, there are very few. In fact, to my knowledge, there's only really one that has really good technical representation on the board, and that's, as I understand it, General Motors, right? General Motors have several people on the board that actually have real experience. I think the latest statistic I saw was something like 12% of Fortune 500s identify that they have technical expertise with regard to cyber, but that doesn't mean they actually have anybody who knows cyber. That means that they have potentially somebody on the board who went to a couple-hour class or got some type of training or education, but they're not a professional, right? And so I think there needs to be actual representation at companies on the board where they can understand what the problem
That
is.
was one of the things SEC backed off from.
I know, and
They had a chance, and they
did. And it didn't go far enough. But this is a mirror of going back to SOX regulations, right? When we didn't have to have somebody on the board who understood how to read a balance sheet.
Right. But it also speaks loudly to, is your CISO a business leader? Does he speak business-ese or she?
Well, that's where
right?
there's always been confusion, right? So not many CISOs are actually chief or officer of anything, right?
Well, you got two things. One, they have the title without the representation and without the ability to speak directly. And others, they don't have the title, but they get in there and they know people and they can influence decision-making at the highest level. So, yeah, there's not enough, clearly. If you look at the hierarchy in corporations, it's like, wait, it's a CISO. Why is he reporting to another CISO? Why isn't he having his seat at the table? What's going on here?
Yeah,
And
for a
this
long
is-
time it was report to the CIO and that, native conflict of interest. But again, like, how many other C-level roles report to other C-level roles?
Yeah.
It's like, that's not the intent, right? I often hear, well, the CEO doesn't have the time for it. He doesn't understand it. Well, then he should probably get educated if it's one of the top 3 risks and likely the top 1 risk to the organization, right?
Well, so that's the thing. Technology and security is touching everything every company does.
We're
now.
all technology
It's
companies.
everything now.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what company, what it is. And they're not getting that enough. Some companies kind of figuring it out.
Which we saw that with Change, right? So Wyden came out with the Wyden report, and one of the things he said is you can't really hold the CISO responsible because he doesn't really have the experience, right? I mean, you really need to hold the CEO and the board responsible for hiring a guy in that role that didn't have experience in that type of company. And so, again, board level education, board level experts, right? Somebody on the board who actually understands this can ask the right questions, and you can have intelligent discussions at the board level
And how about
to understand the risk.
How about board accountability?
I want to circle this back to one of the most fundamental things, which is patching vulnerable software systems, right?
Yeah, and we've seen recently, I don't know if you've seen the same thing, but I've seen this push to, like, let's not patch everything, right? Like, let's just patch the stuff that's like the high level stuff that
You always
we know
got to
that there's
prioritize.
exploits for.
You always got to prioritize.
You do, but there's that